There we go. Boom. All right. Welcome back to the No Life Jackets podcast. Here we go. Got my buddy Tim back on again because he happens to be from a country that shares a border with Ukraine at the moment. And so we're going to have a conversation about this anyway. We figured we'd record it and just see how it would go. So how you doing, Tim?
Hey, Brian. Thanks for inviting me again. I wish we would be speaking on a different topic, much happier one, but yeah, it is what it is, I guess.
Yep.
Doing pretty good. How are you?
Not too shabby. Not terrible. Yeah, there's been a lot of doom and gloom, I gotta say. Like a lot of the like podcasts I listen to where I get news and stuff, it's all been like, everything's about Ukraine and talking it down. It seems like every news article I see is all about it and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah,
So I've been trying to stay positive, and I figure if nuclear war comes to it,
you
not
better
any
get it
use
first.
worrying about it. Nothing I can do.
Yep, that's pretty much it. You
Gotcha.
better pray you get hit first because you don't want to survive that.
Thankfully, I don't think anyone's first target is going to be Minnesota. I think they'll aim for one of those more important states, like almost all the others.
Like Iowa. Yep.
We gotta take out their cornfields. That'd be pretty good. All right, but anyway, so I'm just kind of curious. So, over here, it's taken over the entire news cycle and everything. So I get a lot of it, but we're still, I'm halfway around the world from all of this. So I'm kind of curious in your like daily life and like walking around in the real world and all of that over there. Like, have you noticed any big changes or effects?
Well, so there's two things here. One thing is that right now I'm in Prague, right? So that's in Czech Republic. That's the capital of Czech Republic for anyone who forgot their middle school level of geography. Uh, yeah, so here in Prague, it's definitely more noticeable than in my hometown in Slovakia. And the reason why is, sort of natural, right? Because a lot of the people who are moving from Ukraine are moving to, the apartments, or they're moving with people who they've already known before.
Mm-hmm.
They're moving with their, families who've been working abroad, and that's usually in big cities. And the Czech Republic currently has about 200,000 refugees stationed here, which they've just reported yesterday basically fulfilled their capacity. So that's about it for what the Czech Republic can absorb. In terms of feeling it, you definitely hear more Ukrainian on the streets.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yep. So, for example, we work out at this hotel nearby. There's a gym at the hotel, and since it's the closest one, we go there to work out. And you definitely hear a lot more Ukrainian on the in the corridors, and people with luggage, moving in all the
Mm-hmm.
time, moving in and about. Um, yeah, I've traveled to Slovakia last weekend. When I came back, my girlfriend was waiting for me at the main station, and although it was a Sunday, so you would expect more traffic. It was still noticeably crowded. The station
Mm-hmm.
was, uh, you know, people coming in, little kids moving on and about, people with a lot of luggage. My guess is they were traveling from Ukraine, or yeah, they were refugees fleeing probably. So you can feel it in terms of how often you hear Ukrainian on the streets, and in terms of the traffic of the city.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's about Prague. The second thing, in Slovakia, in my hometown, which I visited just last week uh, because of work, um, you don't notice it there as much. But
Mm-hmm.
since I work for this government office, we're organizing humanitarian help for these people. And what used to be previously this this big warehouse where the mass vaccination took place before COVID was still a thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So during those times, we had this mass vaccination going on there, but now we have these racks with clothes, food,
Mm-hmm.
medicine, and all of that. And so I've been there with my boss, and we took a look at it. It's really a huge warehouse stacked with things. People coming in, bringing stuff,
Mm-hmm.
new clothes. Just really brand new clothes. People buying stuff, so that because some people who come have really just the clothes on their backs and then really nothing with them. So we provide them food. And there's like these huge crates with toys, or and then with like sweets for the kids. If you're a kid, you can just come and grab a toy or
Mm-hmm.
something sweet. Yeah, so you can see that definitely. I've had a friend who went to the border actually. I've had a couple, but I've had this particular one, very good friend who went to the border, and he was trying to, basically help. So he stacked his car with whatever he could buy at the store, like water, packed water, whatever, just supplies that you would
Mm-hmm.
figure people in need could use. So he went there to the Slovak Ukrainian border and tried to help however he could. And he got in contact with this organization, Chefs Without Borders, which is the equivalent of Doctors Without Borders. But
Mm-hmm. Nice.
so he got in contact with them, and he helped them cook for the entire operation essentially. And so he saw a lot of families coming in. They were handing out food, soups and stuff. So yeah, he told me the first view, or like the first hand view of the situation. And he basically told me that well, the state didn't really catch up to what was expected of it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
basically all of the help that was being provided to these refugees was being provided by the third sector, non-governmental organizations, volunteers,
Mm-hmm.
all of that. So the state really couldn't react fast enough, and a lot of the help at the border relied on volunteer work, and that's
Gotcha.
that's true with Slovakia and with Poland as well. So that's two things right there.
Gotcha. Nice. Okay. Yeah, I kind of figured that, I mean, obviously just because, I was just looking at a map and like, because I hear a lot of refugees going into Poland. So
Yes,
I figured there would probably be less going into Slovakia just because they share less border. But
yes.
gotcha. Interesting.
Yeah,
Mm,
Poland has got like 12 border crossings. I think it's 12, and Slovakia has three. Right,
gotcha.
so the traffic is going to be different, and people flee to Poland because culturally, Ukrainians and Polish are much more connected, and yeah, and a lot of and Poland already has a significant Ukrainian minority of about million and a half to 2 million people
Oh, gotcha.
prior to the war. So yeah,
Interesting. It's kind of like it's all this like little stuff like even where you're at in Prague, like you're, like from when I looked at it earlier, like a 14, 15 hour drive from
yep,
Kyiv basically. And it's just like the so much different cultures packed into such a small space just kind of blows my mind being in America where I can drive in almost any direction aside from north up here in Minnesota for
yeah,
2 days and not not cross the border. So
yeah.
interesting. That's kind of
That's Europe for you. Yeah.
hmm nice. All right, so I was wondering, so over here in like the last week especially, there have been like some cases where, like in Washington D.C., there's a famous restaurant called Russia House and it got vandalized, and there's been
Mm,
there's been kind of a whole lot of like anti-Russian hate, like people like bars renaming the Moscow Mule to something else, like the Moldova Mule, I can't remember, something like that. But
yeah.
they're like changing names on drink, like when they were changing names from French fries to Freedom Fries for like 3 months back in 2006 or
Yeah.
whatever. But but there's been a whole lot of stuff like that. So I was just wondering if you've seen anything like that. I suppose I'm not sure if uh,
Hmm.
either Czech Republic or Slovakia has much of a Russian minority. But wondering if you see
Yeah,
anything like that.
Czech Republic definitely does. And the first thing I want to say about this is that this is not very uncommon historically. So, for
Mhm.
example, in Germany, the French word bonbon it's basically candy, right?
Yeah.
It stands for candy. During the war, Germans changed that to, I don't know, some German thing.
Oh
They
yeah.
changed the word burger as well to some German thing. Um, Also, on the contrary, the French, the word for cologne, right? The French changed it because Cologne is a city, right,
Yeah.
in West Germany or in Western Germany now. Yeah. So and they changed it. So this is not terribly uncommon. Over here, what I've noticed is that, for example, one of the I don't know which city it was, but I'm not sure if it was in Poland or in Prague as well. I think Prague changed the name of the street that the Russian embassy is at, and they've changed it to something like the Street of Ukrainian Heroes or something like that. I think.
Gotcha.
So yeah, so that's been a thing. Some streets got renamed as well. I don't remember the exact cases, but I know that some things like this have taken place. And in Prague, there's so in much of Europe, there's been this Russian bank, Sberbank, which has been very,
Mhm.
if you don't know like the if you don't know like the background of it, you would just assume it's a normal bank, right? But it was Russia's state sponsored bank,
Mhm.
and it got one of these banks got like vandalized here in Prague. So yeah,
Gotcha.
like they broke the window, and yeah, so there's definitely some of this anti-Russian sentiment,
Mhm.
unfortunately.
Gotcha. Yeah, I've seen a lot of that. But yeah, the whole renaming food thing, it always like I always just laugh. It's like, really, you think that's gonna do it? But like, during World War II, I think they renamed sauerkraut over here to Liberty lettuce, I think is what they called it.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's right. That's right.
I just love that whenever this happens in America, they always go to like renaming it something to do with freedom or liberty or something like that. Like, oh,
Yeah.
it's fantastic. But so like so I'm kind of interested because this is something that I don't think would have happened in a like a different time period when there have been a lot of these conflicts before. Is like
Mm,
this sort of like cancellation of anything Russian, right? Like you have
hmm
all these corporations pulling their stuff out of Russia. And I mean, there's some ridiculous cases. There's like some charity I heard that like worked with
mm,
terminally ill cancer patients that pulled out of
mm,
Russia. Like
hmm.
that's like that was gonna help. But so I'm kind of curious what your thoughts on a lot of this is, because I think in a lot of cases it's going too far. But I can see a lot
Mm,
of, like, I think to a certain point it's pretty good. Like I heard there was a like a conductor for some symphony in Germany, I think, that was was like friends with Vladimir Putin or something, and he was fired. So
hmm
something like that. So I'm kind of interested what you think about the sort of, like, it's not like a governmental sanction as much. It's just kind of normal everyday people, you know,
hmm
or
hmm
companies pulling out and cutting ties.
Yeah. So the first thing I'm going to say about this is that the purpose of sanctions is to punish, right?
Hmm.
But when you say this, you also have to say that once the action that you seek is done, you have to lift those sanctions, and you have to make this clear, right? So
Hmm.
you punish someone, but you have to also you also have to make clear how they can get rid of that punishment. So um, yeah, so that's the first thing I'm going to say, and I think that sanctioning Russia is right, and we have to strike it hard, uh, unfortunately, because that's currently our best option out there. All the other options will result in the weakening of Europe and perhaps of the transatlantic relationship as well. So this is our best bet right now because we have to do something,
Hmm.
and what we've done so far has hit Russia
Oh yeah.
quite significantly.
Hmm.
Uh, when I look at the sort of these more ridiculous cases of sanctioning some of these people, well, there's been one professor at my university that said that he will no longer he posted like a tweet or something. He will
Hmm.
no longer take Russian students for dissertations, and the current ones he's hosting, he's not going to host anymore, right? So he's basically uh, made them change their subject and probably put their studies in jeopardy.
Wow.
Um, well, yeah, that's and then he pulled it. He deleted the tweet, and I believe he didn't actually fulfill on his promise here.
Hmm.
But I think this is wrong. This is part of the panic, and I don't think the Russians that fled Russia should be necessarily punished, because one of
Hmm.
the reasons they fled is that they don't agree with the regime, right? It doesn't have to be true all the time. I've known some Russians that stayed in Europe and which have supported Putin.
Hmm.
Um, I've known this particular girl I've met in Portugal, and she went to MGIMO, which is like this prestigious university in Moscow, which basically raises the new uh, the new generation of Russian officers and
Hmm.
Russian like intellectual elite
Yep.
and diplomatic elite, and she has been a stark supporter of Putin. So that's she's well educated, spent time in Western Europe,
Hmm.
um, yet she found a lot of support for a lot of sympathy for Putin, which is
Hmm.
there's no excuse for that.
Yeah.
So to some degree, I think that it's just been part of the overreaction here. That we've had this moral panic, and people felt like we need to do something, and some people have overstepped the line, but I don't think that's been the general rule. I think most people behaved like what rationally you would say, and there's been some missteps, but
Hmm.
generally, yeah, I would just say that this was just part of the moral panic, and it's something to be accounted for in
Yeah.
situations like this.
Definitely. Like there's bound to be some like overstepping of the line, so to say,
Yeah.
when you take something like that too far. It's bound to happen. I think I don't think it's gone. I don't think it's been like rampant.
Hmm.
Like racist attacks or anything going on that I've seen. So hasn't been too bad. Kind of going back to the point on sanctions. So I've been listening to some podcasts trying to get a feel for um what a lot of different people think about it. And one particular podcast that I listen to a lot has brought up like the idea of sanctions themselves. Really likes them, supports them, but they really just kind of think they should be targeted towards Putin and the oligarchs more than anybody
Hmm.
else or state entities. Um, the idea is that kind of when we do these broad sanctions, even on things like oil or their wheat or something
Hmm.
like that, that's gonna hurt the average Russian citizen more than anything
Yep.
else. And particularly because they're such like an autocratic society, right? It's not necessarily does Putin really care
Yep.
to a
He
certain point when
doesn't.
that happens? Yeah, and they kind of brought the point like, hey, you just don't underestimate how like when we put these sanctions out there, that gives Putin the kind of like, the ability to say like, hey, you're suffering. It's not because of me. This is because of these other countries that are sanctioning you and doing all of this. So they're kind of advocating for more just those targeted ones against just the oligarchs. So I was curious about what you thought about that.
I think this is bound to happen.
Hmm.
In Russia, there's something that's called something very there's a prominent effect very present in Russia, and it's very specific for Russia, which is called rally around the flag effect, right? So whatever happens when you're a leader in Russia, you say it's an outside force that's trying to take us down, and we have to like just get through it, and you know uh, just get on with it, and life's going to be hard, and it's always been hard, and
Hmm.
but we're going to get through this, right? And whenever Russia is subjected to external pressure like this, Russians as a culture, they tend to get bind they bind together even more than they used to before.
Hmm.
So if you look at data, whenever Russia became sort of internally disorganized, let's say, they were trying to look for an external enemy to
Hmm.
yeah, they were trying to look for an external enemy to
Gotcha.
blame yeah. So like sanctions, like this is really it's really a great question that you've asked, because to some degree we don't know what's going to happen, because these sanctions are really unprecedented. Like the entire world has basically turned its back on Russia, except for China and India,
Hmm.
which have abstained, sort of. But the entire developed world, let's say, has turned their backs on Russia, and the sanctions are so strict actually that we don't know what's going to happen. And this is it will be one of the historical lessons that
Interesting.
we'll be drawing from this. We're just gonna see, we're just gonna see what happens from this.
Gotcha.
But
Yeah, I've heard that before. Like, because they're like a G20 country, and like sanctioning the central
mhm,
bank of a G20 country has never happened. Like the
yep,
contraction their economy went through in like a week was nuts compared to anything else we've seen. So that's a good point that this is completely unprecedented.
yeah, it really is. It really is. Even the sanctions that were put onto Iran were this strict,
Hmm.
and Iran has been under some heavy freaking sanctions.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, this is really, we don't know what's gonna happen here. My guess is that it very much depends on how China behaves in this scenario, because
Hmm.
China could really, and this is a wild guess, but that's a guess that I've tried to I've tried to examine, and it seems to me like it's going to happen. China will probably wait how the situation unfolds, and
Hmm.
there's no way Russia will come out of this stronger than they have been before the
No.
war. This will weaken them a lot, and China is going to take advantage of that, and they'll try to um, fill in the power vacuum in Asia that will be left after Russia. And in my estimation, this will cause something like a new Cold War divide, because there's no way uh, Europe will keep on the same relations with Russia as they have
Hmm.
up to this point, and Russia will have to turn to China, and this will effectively cause a new Iron Curtain. But that's a guess at this point. But I think it's something that's bound to happen.
Gotcha. Yeah, I've heard that. That makes a lot of sense. Like, I was actually kind of surprised with how like China abstaining from that vote, and like some of the like press releases that I've heard were
Yeah.
more harsh of Russia than I suspected. Because I think the like the response and the sanctions and everything has been harsher than even China probably thought was was
Hmm.
gonna be. Um, that and Russia just can't seem to like resist invading a country when China holds an Olympics. Like every time it comes around, they're just going
Yeah.
somewhere. It,
Yeah.
it
It's
just
and there's been communication released. There's been some evidence released that basically Russia pleaded for China to wait, or excuse me, the other way
mm-hmm.
around. China pleaded for Russia to wait with the invasion until the Olympics are done.
Yep,
So yeah,
for sure.
and yeah, it's happened before. So, but I wouldn't be looking for like a law relationship there. Yeah. So
Yeah, this is how physics works. There's gravity. There's wind resistance, and there's Russia invading during the Olympics. It's
yep.
Newton's fifth law or whatever it is.
Fifth love, thermodynamics. Yeah.
Gotcha. Interesting. So, oh, I had another thing that I was gonna jump to right off of that. What was it? Oh, I might have completely lost it. Oh,
Mm.
I almost had it back.
There you go.
Gosh, I don't know. Oh, so this one is kind of related to it. So, like, obviously, from like a rational point of view, like what Putin's
Hmm.
done is completely insane, right? Like, no rational ruler, right, would come out of
Precisely.
this without like some very deep ideology, which clearly he has, given like that speech that he gave, basically right
Yep.
before right before they invaded. Because up until that point, you're massing troops at the border. It kind of seemed like a play for leverage to get something out of them to say they're not going to join NATO, or for NATO to
Yep.
withdraw the invitation. But that speech he gave right before he came over was kind of, I've heard some translations sort of, and it's just sort of, not going back to the USSR, but kind of we need to rebuild the Russian Empire, from before the Soviet
Yeah.
Union, and kind of some ideology like that. So I was kind of curious, what do you think this will like? What's kind of the response going to be from Western Europe? Like, is it going like, because like obviously they've cut off that big pipeline that was going to be going into Germany that would have been huge for
Yeah.
Russia. Like all the relationships here are just going to go nuts. Like I think I've heard some news that from various people in the EU that their like defense budgets are finally going to be mandated to be a certain percentage of GDP, so that
Yep.
they're not just relying on the U.S. Big Daddy nuclear umbrella. um, so
Yep.
what do you think like the response from Western Europe's going to be here, if there's going to be any sort of like diplomatic reach out? It just seems like it's going to be such a severe cutoff from Russia at this
Mhm.
point. I don't see it going back to anything resembling a normal trading relationship.
Yeah, me neither. I mean, so far, the West or the European Union has been trying to give Russia the benefit of the doubt, right? So they've been so for the last 30 years, essentially, the topic of the Euro-Russian relation was trade, and Germany was a huge proponent of the idea that through trade we can actually make Russia make certain like steps towards the European type of
Mm-hmm.
state and statehood. That has been a giant misstep. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that's why I think that's why the Germans were still very adamant on keeping the trade with Russia, because they thought it's better to keep Russians close to us. And I think, were it not for Putin and the way his government works, were it not for that,
Mm-hmm.
this perhaps might have been a very fruitful relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
We trade, and there's because trade basically breeds good relations, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that Russia turned into an autocracy changed everything, I think, and nobody really accounted this. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah. What was your question again? You asked. Oh, what
Well,
the relations will be, right? And
mm-hmm.
what's going to happen next with like the defense budgets? Well, so far it looks like Europe is finally we've gotten like a huge slap,
Yeah.
and it's probably a huge wake up call for a lot of these countries. But it also depends. Like we have to realize that right now we are in the midst of it, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
in the crisis. Emotions are rampant,
Mm-hmm.
um, and the way it works in politics is that oftentimes, politics are driven by emotions, not necessarily
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
by rationale, right? Um, Especially in crises, and this obviously is a crisis. So it depends how much this political rhetoric can actually be carried over to policy, because a lot of politicians in Europe are actually saying right now that, okay, we will increase our defense budget, we will do this and that.
Mm-hmm.
To what degree that will carry on to into policy, I think that remains questionable. Now, the greatest change that I've encountered in this regard was Germany actually shedding its basically its policy since the end of the Second World War, and they've basically pledged to fulfill the 2% GDP quota that's required
Mm-hmm.
by NATO, and that's a huge game changer, because Germany is very culturally self-aware, and
Mm-hmm.
they've been very wary of growing their weapons arsenal
Mm-hmm.
and so forth. So this is a huge change in terms of how the defense relationship of Europe is constituted.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Okay.
Yeah, and France is still the only European Union country with nukes. So uh,
Oh,
I
gotcha.
hope I hope that's not going to change. That's not bound to change, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, in Europe there's only two countries with nukes, right? There's France and the UK. The UK is no
Gotcha.
longer in the EU. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Okay. So, kind of zooming in a little bit on Ukraine specifically.
Hmm.
Um, at this point, from what I've been hearing and kind of how I've been thinking about it, I think this is probably going to drag on for years, right? I kind of sort of liken this to the U.S. going into Iraq or something like that, right? It's going to
Hmm.
drag on. There's going to be guerrilla warfare and resistance for a long time. Um, do you see any opportunity for any sort of diplomatic solution at this point? I don't really see much of an off ramp from what I've been seeing, but
Hmm.
do you have any ideas on what a sort of diplomatic solution would look like that
Hmm.
could happen, or if it's just not going to happen?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think that well, first of all, I don't think this war can go on for years because Russia will simply not have the means to do it. There's no way Russia will have the money to keep this invasion going for years and to
That's a
keep
good point.
Ukraine under its rule. There's simply no way. Um, yeah, I think I've just seen this message on Twitter. It was tweeted by I don't remember who it was tweeted by, but it's a pretty good source. It was
Mm-hmm.
some governmental official, and it wasn't a governmental official. It was the CEO of Bellingcat, which is like this international net of investigative journalists.
Gotcha.
I think his name is Grozev, Grozeb, Grozev, and he said that according to his sources, a diplomatic solution is bound to be achieved in 2 to 3 days.
Oh,
So,
gotcha.
so that's big news. We'll see. But I think that this war is not going according to Russia's plan.
Oh,
So
definitely,
that
definitely
yeah, so
not.
they know that. So they know they have to get out. They realize they fucked up bad and they have to get out. Um,
Gotcha.
what the diplomatic solution will be is questionable.
Mm-hmm.
In my estimation, they will try to keep Crimea, and I think Crimea will probably be a part of Russia.
Yeah, I don't
That's
see
wild
that
guess.
moving. Yeah.
That's speculation, but I think this is almost established in terms of the DNR and LNR, the Donetsk
Mm-hmm.
People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic being independent or joining Russia. I think that's going to be on the table.
Mm-hmm.
Um, some people have suggested that what Russians will demand is like basically create a land bridge to Crimea. So they will try to take some of the parts of southern Ukraine,
Mm-hmm.
along with so there will be Donetsk People's Republic, Luhansk People's Republic, and some of the land that will connect
Mm-hmm.
Crimea with mainland Russia. So that's something that's on the table. Uh, Perhaps I've
Gotcha.
seen some analysts saying that we'll see. We'll see whether Ukraine is willing to you know is willing to submit to these conditions
Mm-hmm.
in exchange for for the end of the war, which is it's ridiculous. It's tough, but yeah, we'll see. I think Zelensky, as much as he's enjoyed public support, if he does submit to these conditions, he's going to lose some of that popularity because
Yeah, definitely.
people will be like let down and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But as a good leader, he should be ready to accept that.
Definitely. Okay. Yeah, I've seen because I think I heard some points from some other talks that, like at least early on, that Russia was asking for for Zelensky to be replaced
Hmm.
with someone else, or at least have like a prime minister added. So it'd be
Yeah.
maybe another one that that they'd set up there and like complete demilitarization of Ukraine, which is clearly not going to happen
Yeah, it's
after you've
not gonna
invaded
happen.
them, right? So
Yeah,
it's it's a bit of a ridiculous one, but okay.
that's
I'm glad to see that you're a little bit more optimistic. So maybe I'm a little too much doom and gloom on that. I see a lot of um like I just don't know. Like I feel like I'm gonna like the world like the estimation that the world's making of Russia's military strength is
hmm
way undercounting it right now. Like for
hmm
a long time, right? Like the Russians, big bad guys, right? One of the best armies in the world, right? Then like this, we obviously didn't think they were that fantastic, but before they were in Ukraine, they were like boasting, we could take Kiev in 11 minutes. Just give me
hmm
the order. Boom, right? Clearly that didn't work out. But because they've had so many logistics issues and haven't been doing very well in the war, I feel like everybody's like, oh yeah, Ukraine could totally win this. It's like, now hold up, Russia,
Yeah.
the amount of firepower they have compared to Ukraine is ridiculous. This
Yep.
is not going to. If it drags out and they really want to, they can just like. I really hope it doesn't get to this, but like what they did in Chechnya and just
Yeah.
complete scorched earth entire cities.
Or Syria. Yeah.
Yeah, Syria with
Yep.
the Assad regime, they did the same thing. For a while there,
And
everybody
this.
thought it was gonna
Yeah.
Syria with the coup was gonna be successful, and then they just
Yeah.
absolutely decimated it.
Yeah. And yeah, this is basically how the Russian military doctrine is constituted. It's composed of heavy firepower, and so the first order is just bombard the shit out of everything,
Mm-hmm.
and then send in troops to clear out the rest. That's basically the Russian military doctrine. This is how they train. This is how they conduct their military exercises. Um,
Mm-hmm.
this is how they do warfare. And yeah, there's been several analysts saying that Russia has so far, well, perhaps in the first week or two of the
Mm-hmm.
war, they've been so far sort of benevolent towards the Ukrainians in terms of their potential firepower. But I think uh, with the current news, I think they've already started on their some of these harsher military tactics.
Mm-hmm.
So nothing is out of question at this point. I think, and they're really trying to just break the Ukrainians at this point. They're trying to
Yeah.
break their morale, break the civilians, the army as well, break the political leadership, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's yep.
Definitely. Gotcha. Yeah, and that's just it's just a little scary because like when bad things happen and there's mass slaughter and all this, it's always when one side feels like they there's no particular way to go, they feel like they're up against a wall, they feel like they're about to lose.
Mm-hmm.
That's when these things start to come out, and that's why I've
Yep.
seen a lot of stuff that been like there have been senators and representatives over here like you should put a no-fly zone over Ukraine, like right the
Mm-hmm.
U.S. should put a no-fly zone over
Mm-hmm.
there, and it's
Mm-hmm.
like it's like that's essentially equivalent to saying that we should go to war with Russia. Just come out and say it. I mean, if we want us to shoot their planes out of the sky and clear off all
Yep.
their ground artillery so they can't shoot us,
Yep.
we're going to war with Russia. And in that case, if it ever got to a place where two nuclear powers are going in direct conflict, I mean, the percentage chance of the end of the world comes is as small as it is. How much is too much when you're talking about that being the being the
Yeah.
outcome, right? Is 1% too much? 5%? Um, so there's been a lot of people I think that have been calling for stuff like that that just have not quite figured it out here in America. So hopefully,
Mm-hmm.
I'm I think if there can be a European-led diplomatic response to this, I think that'd be fantastic. Because if the
Yeah.
talks break down for much longer, I just don't see this going any other way than being a long drag out war for a
Precisely.
long
And
time.
once the spiral of the war starts rotating, it's very hard to stop it. It's much easier to start a war than to end it, right?
Hmm.
And essentially at this point, like we don't know where it could go, right? There's been I've seen footage from like Russian state TV propaganda, and the propaganda basically it was sort of hypothetically examining how to best invade northeastern Poland and the Baltics, right? So it was perhaps just sort of like muscle flexing, but
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't underestimate the Russians. I've been to this. So in Prague, there's tons of discussions going on right now at universities at different places, and I attend a lot of those. And there's been a discussion with this expert, which I'm recording a podcast with this week.
Okay.
Libor Yellen is his name, and this guy, he said, don't underestimate the Russians. We've underestimated what they've said before, because they've been saying this, like, they're perfectly willing to
Mm-hmm.
use military strength to achieve their quote unquote national interests, whatever, however you define that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we haven't been listening to them, and now we have a war. So he said, don't underestimate them, and believe what they say when they talk about aggression. So I think, yeah, in terms of where this could go, if there's a diplomatic solution, great, but that doesn't mean it's the end of the conflict for Europe, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
So.
For sure. Gotcha. So pulling back a little bit, looking like as far as like what lessons, um, like like the West and we could take um, from this war here. Like, what do you think? Like over the last 20, 30 years, we've probably seen increasing Russian
Mhm.
aggression. But what do you think are some lessons that we could look back and say, okay, maybe we should have done this differently, knowing what we do now about what the outcomes of certain policies and strategies were.
Mhm. Well, to some degree, I think from the way I've looked at this, to some degree, I think this was inevitable, because the Russians. Well, first you have to understand how the Russian society works. It's very it's very hierarchical. Very. I've been to this discussion with this former diplomat. He was the attaché to Moscow, and he said this story. So I think this story just perfectly describes the Russian mentality. So listen to this. So he was on this boat, right? And somewhere in the Russian taiga, there's been like these huge two rivers and an estuary, and it's just endless forest and nothing as long as far as your eye can see.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were just sailing away on this boat. And he said, there was this huge parade there on the ship, and cocktails and champagne, and sort of like
Mm-hmm.
bourgeois in sort of like a bourgeois spirit. And you know, he said he sort of mentioned to someone that he would like to take a look to the forest. He would like to walk through the taiga, and so there was some murmur, and lo and behold, the ship starts to head towards the bank, and they didn't tell him that actually landing near the bank could damage the ship, because of how the bank was, because it was simply too narrow, and all of that. So like the captain fulfilled his wish, because he's the diplomatic attaché, and so he landed the ship. It just landed on the coast. It just sort of like uh,
Just
stuck into the mud
beaches
and
it,
and
yeah.
and yeah, and then the bridge falls. And there he goes. He goes out into the woods and walks through it, through the nothingness and darkness of the Russian taiga. And he said, "Well, this perfectly describes the Russian mentality. They will do whatever the person that's up in the hierarchy wishes for." And I
Mm-hmm.
think this is great. This is a great portrayal of how Russians think. Um, yeah, there's no real plurality of opinion. There's no real plurality of thought in Russia, and so therefore
Mm-hmm.
there's no real feedback. There's no real feedback of how the society works, of how decisions should be taken.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and
Interesting. This is interesting because I think like a lot of these cultural differences, these are the kinds of things um, that I think a lot of people in America and maybe in Europe as well, although I'm not sure, is
Hmm.
think it's like, like we have democracy, freedom of speech. We have these things, individualism, all of this, right? These are cultural constants, and everybody has these inside of them, just waiting to be let out, and they're being
Hmm.
held down by their old ways, right? So this is the idea, like America goes into Afghanistan or Iraq, and the dumbass
Hmm.
generals are there like, oh, they'll treat us as liberators, right? This has been everybody who ever invades a country in the history. They'll treat us as liberators. They'll see how great our society is. They'll immediately switch to it. Their culture will be relegated to a yearly ethnic parade, and the rest of the
Hmm.
time they'll act like a complete American democracy, and it's going to be perfect. There's no reason to think about any cultural differences here at all. And
Yeah, but I wouldn't put Afghanistan and Russia into the same bag, but it definitely
for sure.
shows. Yeah, but it definitely shows for and Russia. I mean, they do have the potential because they're look something that's very provocative or perhaps perverse to some degree about
Mm-hmm.
Russia is that they just can't help but admire Europe and the West. You've probably seen the pictures when the first McDonald's opened in
Mm-hmm.
Moscow.
Yep.
Huge, just huge rows of people
Yep.
just waiting to try this decrepit Western
This is
multinational.
horrific. These blue jeans and burgers. Let me try some of these
Yeah,
motherfuckers.
yeah, yeah. That's precisely it. So they can't help but be fascinated with the West and Russia and I'm sorry and Europe, but at the same time they don't want to be like us. They
Mm-hmm.
want to be their own thing. So perhaps they wish to be like Europe materially, but not in terms of the values Europe or the West holds, U.S. and Europe, let's say. So
Gotcha.
they're their own thing, really. Russians, yeah, they're their own thing, and they have what's called a grievance, right? Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, they felt like they've been betrayed, and they feel like their rightful place on the world stage
Mm-hmm.
is not fulfilled, and that's what they've been trying to achieve. Get back on the world stage, be a superpower again.
Mm-hmm.
And they have this complex. They have this grievance. They feel like they've been wronged. So that's
Gotcha.
something that yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
that's that's a powerful force. I think we see like the last few years in particular. I think like I'm like trying to find sources on like European interstate politics and stuff like that over here is
Hmm.
kind of difficult for me a lot of times. But when I look over there, you see a lot of like it seems to almost be something that's just kind of rising around the globe, kind of sort of like national return of nationalism to a certain degree.
Hmm.
Depending on the country, right? You see that in America here with Donald Trump, right? Make America great again, right? Go back to a mythical America that totally existed at some point, where everything was perfect. And then I've read that you see that in other places. Even I think I can't remember what the name of the parties are because it's been a while since I read the article. But even in Slovakia, there was
Hmm.
I read an article or two about I can't remember the guy's name anymore. But
Hmm.
there was a certain rise in like nationalistic pride and stuff like that over there. So
Definitely.
gotcha.
Yeah, definitely. And part of the thing, like nationalism is a two-edged sword. Again,
Mm-hmm.
nationalism is something that's making Ukrainians fight
Yep.
today, right?
Mm-hmm.
And were it for no nationalism, Ukraine would fall within the first days. But on the other hand, nationalism is something that makes the Russians invade. So it's a two-edged
Mm-hmm.
sword, and it's like the quote with power. Power is morally neutral. It depends who wields it, right? Because if you have power and you wish to do good with it, quote unquote good, you can achieve great things. But yeah, but with the same amount of power, if you wish to do something bad, or with the same volume, let's say, with the same volume of power, if you wish to do something bad, you
Mm-hmm.
can create tremendous chaos. So power is morally it's morally neutral. It
Mm-hmm.
depends how you wield it. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Same with
Interesting.
nationalism. Yeah.
Yeah, and to go back to your point of like Russian society is very hierarchical and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I've read gosh, I can't remember the name of the book anymore, but there was it was I think the book was fiction, but it was sort of historical fiction. It took place in Japan in the 50s or 60s, I think. When like kind of the idea of industry and people and like businessmen from America were being hired to go over there and consult with them, and they're trying to
Mm-hmm.
institute some sort of industrial business like Western style business hierarchies and stuff over there, and there was let's take this let's like unspoken role. If you were a Japanese company, you would like have your board meetings and you'd set everything up, and then you'd always have on your board this per this you'd have an American there, and the like secret was everybody had a loud American on their board
Mm-hmm.
because they'd
Mm-hmm.
bring in, and the entire job of that guy, and it was he completely understood this job, was to say whatever the CEO or the leader in charge is saying and going for, I need to be the opposite and go hard and just completely counter everything because they understood it was really like self-aware that as they were setting this up, they understood that this sort of system is not going to work like it does in the West unless we bring in some outside influences that don't have as much of a hierarchical focus. So it's really
Mm-hmm.
self-aware in the idea that they always
Wow.
had like a designated American on these boards whose entire job was to just play devil's advocate, so that
Wow.
the people lower down on the totem pole could be like, you know what? Yeah, I think he might have a point, or at least be more open. Once they see someone else tearing into an idea, they'll be like, okay, I can poke at this part of it too. So
Wow. It takes an incredible amount of self. What would you call it? It takes an incredible amount of like morality, I'd say, or like ethical principle
hmm,
to be able to admit that you're wrong, and to really to be so self-aware that you actually invite this guy who is supposed to deconstruct the way your society has worked before. Japan and Germany has been one of the few countries have been one of the few countries that achieved this, and I think Russia needs to go through something like this, but I don't see that happening in any time soon.
mm-hmm.
No way. And they need to do this because they need to change how their society works if they are to be accepted again in the international community.
Definitely, definitely for sure. It's um, like the hard part with looking at a lot of like how stuff works with like the autocracy over in Russia is that it's effective, right? What they're doing works. Here in America, we like to think,
Yeah.
right? Censorship and things like this kind of don't work. And in America, right, they don't, right? But
Yep.
in a place like Russia, where you can dedicate the resources, if you can stamp out an opposing point of view or something at its source quickly enough, and you can get enough of a wide net cast, there's almost no chance of a coup or something like that happening from the inside.
Precisely.
You see this in both China and Russia to an extent. Um, is just that it works, it's effective, and it's very difficult because the idea is that always, we'll open up trading relationships and then it'll change from the inside, right? They'll do this and you know, maybe to a point it's sort of worked in China where they have like a
Yep.
semi-capitalist kind of thing going on, but for the most part it's still the same people in power. They're still censoring and stamping out as many opposing point of views, arresting people. And it works for them. And it's just,
Yep.
change like from the inside like that. It's extreme. I don't think it's ever going to happen if that remains the case. It's going to be very slow if it happens at all.
Yeah, and one of the major differences between the West and Russia is also in the way their economic systems are constituted, right? Because in the West, or even the let's say the European Union plus the US. That's what I mean when I say the West. How our systems work is you have they're multi-layered systems of little enterprises, small enterprises, middle-sized enterprises, and then big corporations, right? And they all function within a system of checks and balances, economic checks and balances, right? In Russia, this is perhaps a fact in Moscow and in St. Petersburg, but in most of Russia, this is not how the economic system works at all. The way it works is still very much resembling the Soviet Union. There's this one huge factory which employs essentially the entire town, and it's controlled by this one oligarch,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's a bunch of these oligarchs, and they're tied with the governmental body. They're tied with the ruling power, and this is how Russia is governed, right? So this is very different to how our systems in the West are organized. And this also needs to change if Russia is ever to change politically in some sense, because its economic system is also very hierarchical and centralized. Yeah, that's the right word, centralized. It's one
Yeah.
factory and it employs a bunch of people, the entire town, and it's easy to control it that way. So that's not
Definitely.
how it works here. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I've gotta read up a little more on some of these interesting cases, like in Japan, and like this
Mm,
sort of like it had like the case in Russia. It has an interestingly similar, like it's not in how it's organized, but in like for instance in South Korea, they have big companies, big corporations, and it's very similar. Like
mhm,
there's towns set up, right, and it's like this town is owned and operated by Hyundai or Samsung, right? Like the owner
oh,
of the company Samsung, the guy who'd founded it, that he
mhm,
like I think 14 years ago or something like that. He had some sort of health issue. They took him into the Samsung hospital, right? They
mm,
have in Samsung City, basically. And they just announced recently that he died, but I think it was after they'd like changed some laws on the books, because the way that their like inheritance laws worked and this was constituted, if that man died, his
mhm,
companies and stuff would be, I think, split equally among all of his children, and the way that that would fracture their
mhm.
like because so much of their economy is Samsung based off, the way that that would fracture their economy would almost be like economic Armageddon for South Korea. So
Wow.
the conspiracy theory is that they had this guy sitting there dead for years, or like on a ventilator, in a coma, just barely keeping him alive long enough for them to modify their system so that his death wouldn't completely knock over their economy.
That's insane. That's insane.
Right? But it's kind of interesting because it's sort of similar in the idea that, like, hey, this city is Samsung City. You live here, you work for
Yeah.
Samsung, even if
Yeah.
you're making burgers or running a
Hmm,
hospital as a nurse, you're working for Samsung. So it's
hmm.
it's it's an interesting almost parallel there, even though they're very different,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah. But there is some parallel, as you say. Yeah.
Nice. All right, let me see. Did I have anything else on my list of questions we didn't get to? Let's see. Ahead of time. Policy. All right, I think that about covers all of it. Do you have any questions or topics you'd like to cover? Or
Sure. I want to
yeah,
ask you.
definitely.
So I've noticed that I watch quite a bit of the American media as well, or
Mm-hmm.
I try to follow it, and I follow some American scholars who've discussed this topic, and I noticed that the American view is very different from Europe. I still feel this detachment from sort of from sort of like understanding the European affairs fully. What the Americans tend to do sometimes is to still view the world as a world of polarity. There's the West, and there's Russia, and we all have our state interest, and it's basically legitimate for Russia to pursue uh, their national interests within their sphere of influence. But we in Europe, we don't think this way. And I've heard that. So, for example, one of the biggest proponents of this view is John Mersheimer. He had this famous talk. He gave it at some of the Ivy League universities, or there's a video of it on YouTube. It's called
Gotcha.
"Why Ukraine is the West's Fault," and it has about 20 million views now. I watched it in 2014 when it came out, and he's basically saying that the West has been through its expansionist policy,
Mm-hmm.
pushing Russia into a corner, and Russia basically had no chance but to strike back and take Crimea. And this view, I sense like this view is still very much present in American thought. So I was wondering what your view from
Hmm.
America was on this whole situation.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think from what I've heard, most I'd probably say most like most just like run of the mill like commentators or
Hmm.
people that I've heard um, don't necessarily agree with that point of view. But that is
Hmm.
definitely,
Hmm.
I've heard a lot of people say that, and a lot of, I'd say, the more intellectual or um, like they're coming with that argument in good faith. A lot more people are coming
Hmm.
with that argument in good faith than some others, I think. But kind of that point of view of, with our NATO expansion, like I think what was it, Estonia and Latvia, I think, are technically in NATO, or I always get those countries mixed up because I'm terrible with
They are.
geography.
They're
But
both in NATO. Yeah.
yeah, so like expanding those and the invitation that was extended to Ukraine, um, to say that didn't play a factor is would definitely be pretty bad. But I see what you mean with like the polarity, and
Hmm.
I think a major reason for that is just because like a lot of people who were around during the Cold War
Yeah.
are still alive, right? A lot of those commentators are still alive and well and kicking, and from a certain point of view, I'd like to think that the kind of American perspective on the polarity of the spheres of influence and things like that. Um, it's probably it's probably a sort of mindset that's shared over in Russia as well,
Hmm.
because in the
Hmm.
Cold War they were the opposing superpower, and like kind of the spheres of influence look at
Yeah.
things um, is a very was very important to, like, even like the way like the Cuban Missile Crisis and things like this. A lot of those issues were resolved where we're like, okay, we'll take our crap out of Turkey, you take your crap out of Cuba. We'll figure this out. We'll line up our spheres of influence, and like a lot of the architects of the solution to Cold War, like I think, was
Kissinger.
it? Yeah, there was some secretary who basically said, I think in an interview or in a press release or something, that the idea, and this was like the architect of
Hmm.
NATO and NATO expansion and setting them up to oppose Russia, was
It's probably
um,
Kissinger. Yeah.
yeah, probably we won't extend 1 inch farther, right? We're going to
Hmm.
go NATO up to here, but we're
Oh,
not going
okay.
to
Hmm.
extend it any farther because we're going to, we'd risk provocation by the Russians.
Hmm.
And it's probably part of Russia's hierarchical thing that they're like, oh, this, he said this, he's
Yeah.
high up in America,
Mm.
therefore this what he said goes. But
Yeah.
that's just not how things work over here, right? People say things all the time when they don't
Mm.
actually have the power to do anything. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, so I think that there's definitely a lot of that point of view. Um,
Hmm.
and I think to a certain extent they're right. Like when they say like this is all the West's fault and Putin kind of had no choice to do this. I don't think that's kind of bullshit. I think he had complete
Hmm.
agency for going this hard. I
Absolutely.
think massing troops on the border and showing some aggression to get like an agreement to not join NATO, right?
Mm.
I think from the usual American point of view that's sort of understandable, right? If he had just massed
Mm.
troops and used that to kind of get something that he'd wanted, something out of
Hmm.
Ukraine saying they won't join NATO, I think that's much more
Mm.
understandable. But as soon as he gave that last speech and went in, um, I
Yeah.
think it kind of shot that view in the foot a little bit.
Yeah. I think that speech was basically aimed at the common Russian rather than the Western
For
audience,
sure. Hmm.
because a lot of these Russian, like the only historical victory of the 20th century was the victory of the Second World War, which they called the Great Patriotic War.
Yep.
Like, and it's still a lot of these people listen to this story, and they respond to it. But
Hmm.
yeah, but I think one of the things that is wrong about the way how we think about the NATO expansion is that it wasn't an imperialistic expansion. NATO
Yes.
expanded because the countries that joined NATO after, let's say, after the end of the Cold War, wanted to join NATO. It wasn't like the United States was like, you have to
That's
join
true.
NATO.
That
No,
that is true. Yeah, I think
every
people who compare it
yeah,
to an imperialist
yeah,
expansion, I
yeah,
think that's definitely a terrible comparison. You're definitely
yeah.
right there. Hmm.
Yeah, it's every country that joined NATO wanted to do it, and they had to align their policy with NATO. So it wasn't imperialistic in this sense. And also, none of the European countries posed a threat to Russia. Like, no
For sure.
European country would invade Russia. there's simply no way.
Yeah,
Simply no way.
nothing's gonna happen. Like, and you even
No.
like what you think Ukraine's gonna try to take back Crimea? That's not gonna
Yeah.
happen, right? Like,
Yeah.
you could basically just post. Like, I think weren't they doing this in Ukraine for years? The Russian army, they're just moving the border up like a few feet during the night when nobody was
Oh.
looking, and they were just. I think it was Ukraine. I'll have to find it, but there was an episode of like Top Gear, the car show with three British guys.
Mm,
And they were driving through Ukraine, and they came
mm,
up, and you can see the border, and it's this like chain link fence, and they're talking to a farmer who's on the other side. Right, this is now halfway across his property. His property isn't in Ukraine or Russia anymore; it's in both because they've
oh.
split it. And so they're talking over the fence with him. He's like, "Yes, 2 weeks ago I was Ukrainian, but now now I suppose I am. They tell me I am Russian now. So
Man, I haven't heard about this. That's interesting. Yeah.
yeah, it's like all sorts of just this weird stuff. But yeah, to pretend that there was any sort of like military threat or anything outside of a hurt to Putin's pride itself is kind of a little ridiculous.
Yeah, in my view, the only reason why Putin really went into this war was because the expansion of the West has endangered his political system, his
Mm-hmm.
autocratic political system, and the way the Russian society is tied with the oligarchs and all of that. Putin and his administration doesn't give a shit about the common Russians. If they would, they wouldn't have invaded Ukraine. They don't give a shit about the common Russian.
Mm-hmm.
Zero.
For sure.
Yeah. So yeah, the only reason, and that's the saddest part about this, the only reason why Putin invaded is to preserve his cronies and his oligarchs, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and people are dying because of that.
Interesting. Gotcha. I wanted to. I actually read about this earlier today, but there was a just like kind of on like the Russian point of view and how things, how this sets up in their minds. Like there was a. It was after the end of the Cold War. At some point, there was an
Hmm.
interview. I think it was an American journalist was interviewing like people who had just like they'd been coming out of gulags, right? People who have been like imprisoned in the past by like Stalin, for example, right? This guy
Hmm.
had been thrown in a gulag for years, close to a decade, by Stalin. He'd been tortured, all the stuff, right? And he comes out, and now there's McDonald's and blue jeans, and this guy who had been thrown in a gulag and tortured was like, I can't believe we have McDonald's and these blue jeans, and my kids are consuming Western media now. Where's Russia's greatness gone? I'm like,
Yeah.
what? Like, never
Yeah.
underestimate the Russian people's capacity for suffering. It's like, if like
Yeah.
that, I can't think of any culture that is more
No.
ready to
No.
just bend over and take it for 30 years. And
Yeah. And eat dirt every day if they have to, but preserve their pride. Yeah.
it's nuts. It's like a whole, because I mean, you meet people like that everywhere, but to have that be such
Yeah.
a cultural component, it's just so different. Like you can find pockets of that in America, like in
Yeah.
like I've been to certain states and cities and like small towns in particular, like not
Hmm.
Blue Earth obviously, but small towns in like the South, and there's
Hmm.
there's a whole lot of stuff like that going on too, a lot of that pride, but to
Hmm.
have it be so prevalent in a whole nation's culture of that size blows my mind.
Yeah. Yep. Precisely. I wouldn't have said it better. So.
Hmm. Yeah. All right. Awesome. Oh yeah, and while we're on that note, like with sanctions and everything,
Mm.
I'm kind of interested to see how this plays out in the long run because along with how much Russians are capable of suffering, like
Hmm.
this is the hardest economic sanctions that have basically ever hit a country. Their economy contracted like 14%. If 2% happens in America, right, it's a big freak out, right?
Yeah.
So like it's a whole lot of suffering they're about to go through. But I'm wondering if like in cutting off oil, like our gas prices in
Mm.
America are going to increase, and
Mm.
I think it's got to be an interesting balance of how much the Russians are willing to suffer all of these sanctions versus how much us Western babies, for lack of a better term, are going to be able to suffer higher gas prices and not being
Yeah.
able to get some of our luxury goods on time.
It's gonna be a tug of war to some degree, for sure.
Mm-hmm, for
Yeah.
sure.
And this is something we have to be ready for. And I think this is something that our political rhetoric is currently lacking. I don't see very many politicians saying that this is what we're doing and it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt the Russians, but it's going to hurt us as well. Not as much as the Russians, but it's going to hurt us as well. And I don't see many people saying this. There's sentiment, oh, we'll put the sanctions in and, we'll sort of get through it. And don't you worry, like everything will be fine. No. I think we're up for a tough time. And, it's better if you tell that to people because they're not stupid, and I see this lacking in our political discussions right now, and I think politicians need to, like conjure up some balls and come clean.
Definitely, for sure. Over in Europe in particular, just given like how much like your capacity for like drilling and refining oil over there, like it pales in comparison even to what we have over here, and our gas prices are gonna. Like obviously it's a global market, but there's already massive pushes in Congress in every place for drilling new oil reserves, building up new refineries, retrofitting them to work with our own shale oil and stuff like that. So I've seen a lot of that here. A lot of it is like the Republicans are doing it just to bash Biden and be like, like 2 years ago you cut the deal on this one oil pipeline and now it's coming to bite us in the butt. So there's a whole lot of that going on, but there is a lot of I think stuff that's going to happen to address that, at least over here, because we are a large oil producing country. We've had like some diplomats flying to Venezuela to get them to pump more oil.
I've seen that,
when we're going to Maduro, we'll be like, hey man, listen, what Russia did is pretty fucked up, right? It's an interesting one, but so I think there's gonna be a big push on that. I think the Saudis have been dodging oil talks or something like that. They haven't pledged any more oil pumping, which is kind of shitty. But we'll see how that one goes.
They're also a shitty state, So
they're such a terrible state. The Saudis, and they're technically America's ally. This is like every time there's a Republican in power, this always comes to bite them in the butt because the Saudis go assassinate a journalist or something.
Yep.
It's just. Like they're so bad, but because they they pretend that they're aligned with us and recognize Israel as a state.
A shit ton of oil.
We've got to beat them. Yeah, the Saudis and the Emirates, OPEC, it's nuts. So we'll see how it goes. I don't know if we'll be able to rely on it. I think a nice thing that I think is going to come out of this, at least for America and probably for Europe too, is energy independence. And I think hopefully
I hope so.
Building some more nuclear power plants and. So that you're not
push
as reliable.
For green energy.
Definitely. Renewables.
And also,
like that.
And to illustrate how deep this divide will be is, even during the Cold War, Europe kept on trading with Russia in terms of energy, even during the Cold War. And now we are pledging to cut our trade with Russia in energy and in natural gas and oil. So this is like a huge freaking shift. Even during the highest times of tension between the West and Russia, we kept on trading. But now that's changing. So that just shows you the extent of political divide.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like Germany in particular, to flip and go these hard on the sanctions has been awesome because let's listen to a podcast from a senator over here, kind of an influential Republican one, Ted Cruz. He has one, and one of the big things that he's done is that oil pipeline that was going to be going into Germany. It was going to be completed in like a month or something like that, and he managed to get pushed through Congress a sanction on any company that works on that line. So no company could fit. It's like 99% complete, and they say that in the last month, no company could work on it anymore. So. I don't know. It's really interesting that they were like, no, Germany, you can't become energy dependent on Russia. And now it's kind of come out to be kind of prescient. So,
I think it was actually done. Like the pipeline is actually completed. The works are completed, but the way Germany dodged it as well was they've actually extended the sort of like examination period or something.
Oh, gotcha.
It was some administrative thing, some flippant thing. And they've basically dodged it this way. But it's not a completely it's not complete nonsense, because if something changes in Russia, if there's a new government, if they oust Putin,
Hmm.
for example, perhaps there will be some rehabilitation of relations, and at that point, these things could become useful. But that's long
For
way
sure.
ahead.
For sure. After Putin, finally
Unless
resigns at
somebody
at the age of 97.
unless somebody assassinates him, which he fucking deserves. Unless somebody does that, yeah,
Yeah, it's
no way.
nuts. I just don't see it happening. It's so crazy. He's like green screening himself into meetings, right? That man's never near another
Uh,
human being long enough to get assassinated. He's a ghost, man.
exactly. Yeah, he's so paranoid, man. It's dangerous. That's what's dangerous about him. Because Hitler, and this is the only comparison I'm willing, or there's a couple that I'm willing to do between Hitler and Putin, but
Mm,
this one is the closest, I think. When Hitler became the murderous machine he always was after he became isolated from his advisors, from his generals, and that was
definitely.
in I think it was 1941. So that's when the biggest slaughter essentially started to take place, and the isolation has a lot to do with that. And I
Mm.
think that once leaders like this, with their finger on the nuclear button, become isolated, that's very dangerous. But we'll see. I hope Putin is not completely out of his mind. Some people say that he's not. I'm
Yeah.
giving them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, but
I hope
I
they're
like to
right.
be optimistic, so I like to think that
Yeah.
he's not as my. Yeah, I mean, it's an ideology thing. I think probably more than anything else. I don't think he's insane, but
Yeah.
when you
I
have a
hope so.
particular ideology about getting back to the great Russian
Mm.
Empire and all that good jazz, you know it's just kind of some corollaries from there. And I
Yeah.
like that you called that out when you made the comparison to Hitler, because a lot of people, they make that so irresponsibly. They're like, this is Hitler,
Yeah.
this is a Holocaust, right? And because I mean, when you say something like that, right, the corollary is like, oh, this is the Holocaust. All right, World War III, let's
Mm.
go, right? We go,
Yeah.
you go
Yeah.
hard at it. It's kind of irresponsible. So that was a good call.
And at the same time, you actually devalue what happened during the Holocaust
Yeah,
if you use this term just lavishly. So yeah.
for sure. All right, awesome. Let's see. Yes, we covered all mine. Anything else you want to ask to wrap up here in the last section? Are we good to go?
Yeah, I think we're good to go to wrap up.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for popping on. This is another. I think we got almost probably an hour, 40 minutes or something like that, maybe. So got some
Hmm.
pretty good some good length here. I'll get this up and let you know. But thanks for popping on again. I love having these conversations. So I look forward to talking to you
Likewise.
again. All right. See ya.
Likewise. All right. See you, Brad.